Good morning all. How are we today? I see there's a couple of comments about our lovely new music for our intro. Pam's had a little play during the week and we've got it sorted, and I think it's a little bit better than that screech we had before. So enjoy. We're going to sort of play with that for a little while, and we may end up changing it again, but for the moment,
no,
she's not going to change it. So there you go.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad you liked the intro. It's upbeat and gets your attention, and that's what we're after.
There you have it. Okay, so, I better put my cup of tea. That was a cup of tea here, hard tea. Anyway, so last week, we started the lovely special jewellery box. And as I said to you right at the beginning of the box, we're going to be using all of the skills that we used in our other boxes. For those of you who weren't watching last week, we're going to put together all of the skills that we used in the last couple of boxes, or 3 boxes I think we did, and put them all together in one big box. Okay, so that's where we're at the moment. So what we did last week is we built the frame. We did a test joint, set up the jig, and built ourselves a frame. Now, during the process of building that frame, what we did was, just go to this camera here, we expanded this joint here. You can see all of those joints are all pretty much the same size, except for that one there, which is where we're going to cut them off. Now, that's 4 millimeters wider than the rest of the joints. So we'll cut that off. What I want to do today is start building the rest of the foundation of the box. Putting feet on, cutting a trench for a base and making a base to put it on, and cut the top off. Now, they're the 3 major tasks that we're going to do. Excuse me, and we'll just see where we go from there, or how far we get with doing that, because all of those tasks, they're an individual task on their own. So let's have a look at what we're going to do. So we're going to put a base in it. Now the base for this box here, I'll move that over to there. The base for this box, actually I might change cameras. The base for this box, this particular box, is silky oak. So I've changed up the different one, but the base for this one here is going to be a piece of cedar, as is the frame. So it's sort of just matching everything together. Now, if you've watched any of my demonstrations in the past at the timber shows, one of the things that I never do with my box frames is use plywood for the framework of the box. I try to sort of use reasonably good timber and something that matches up to the rest of or some of the other parts in the box. So this one here, I've got silky oak in the bottom, and when you open the box, you'll see that I have silky oak internal componentry. So try and match it up, just to make it, look a little bit better. It sort of makes it feel better. I think sometimes plywood makes your job look a little cheap. If you're using it as an exhibition piece in your home, or you're giving it to somebody, if you're using it as a utilitarian piece where you're just going to throw things in the bottom of it and you don't want to damage another piece of timber, well, a good piece of timber, then of course you can go on with use a piece of plywood. But anyhow, let's get that aside. Now, when we cut this, I expanded the joint. I expanded the joints in it so that I could cut the top off, and we got a really nice little box. So that was last week. So over the week, that's actually expanded a tiny little bit and moved, but it's still in good condition. And as you can see, it sits nice and flat, flush on the top and so forth, on the bottom as well. So now it's time to cut the base, cut the trench in the base. So what we're going to do, if I go to here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a trench around the inside of the bottom of of the box. Now I could go to the table saw and I could run it up on the table saw, but what would happen is I would end up with a little step, a little cutout here where I've gone through the piece of timber. If you want to do that, you can. You can always plug it and make it look a little bit like a feature, but you always have a little bit of a mark. I cut my trenches, well, I've got the box in a sort of dry assembled situation. So we're going to do that. Now, the router bit that we're going to use for that is what we call this little gadget here, and we call that, I might get it up a bit closer for you.
Hold it still.
It's what we call our rebate cutter. Carby Tool make them for us. It cuts a 4mm trench 5mm deep with that bearing on it. So that's the router bit we're going to use to cut the feet. Cut the trench, I should say. I'll lock that in place. Now, most of us who have worked with cedar will know that cedar is a very furry timber when you're cutting it. So what happens if you try and tear out a 5mm trench all in one go, that's this deep here, you'll find that you end up with tear out along your edge. There's nothing worse than looking into the bottom of a box, I don't have one here because I haven't done one for a long time, with tear out on the bottom, or having a look on the inside and seeing tear out on the bottom of the box where the base meets the framework. You don't want that to happen. So for me, I found the easiest way to do it is to reduce my depth of cut down to 1.5 millimeters. So to do that, take off the original bearing, okay, so that's the original bearing, and put on a 19mm bearing. Now the 19mm bearing is the one that we have here at Gifkins, and all I've done is just reduce my depth of cut, and you can see much bigger bearing. Now the beauty about this is when we cut the trench, we're going to run around the inside of the box. What we can do, because we're only taking a little bit of material off, we can climb route. Now climb routing is running with the rotation of the router bit. It's not a recommended technique if you're taking out lots of material, basically because the router will try and tear the stuff out of your hands. So to make it easy for yourself, all you need to do is just cut a small bit. That little cut that we do is just a relief cut, and it starts the cut so that we don't get tear out by tearing out lots of material, and then we'll finish it afterwards with the correct size. So that's what we're going to do. Now, in talking about it, what we have to do is, first of all, create a little safety situation. So what I do is, the box is not glued together, so I'm going to tape the box together using a fibre reinforced tape. Now be very careful about how you put it. If you're using this fibre reinforced tape, be very careful how you use your tape. If you run your fingers over the top of that and stick it down hard, what you'll find is, particularly with cedar, when you take the tape off, it will grab the fibres of the timber, and you get a little bit of pulling of fibres, and it'll pull bits and pieces out, which means lots of work to try and sort of fix it. So what I do is I only press it down in the corners. It's fibre reinforced tape. It's not going to stretch. So therefore, and that will allow the box to stay together. It won't fall apart on you. And you don't want that to happen. If you do, your fingers end up on that thing. Okay, and that's not going to be a very pretty sight.
Just a heads up, have you done the router, have you done the bearing for that? Gary Wilkinson said, don't forget to clean and oil the router bit.
I did, Gary. I did it before the show. Okay, but...
Thank you for that.
Thank you, and just for your benefit, Gary, look at that. Hey? And all that stuff that just came out of there came out of the toothbrush. The other side was done beforehand. So, and then a tiny little bit of oil. Look at that, beautiful. Okay, now, when we do this, I've got the tape on the bottom half. Remember, better go to this camera here. I've put the tape on the bottom part of it because the top of it is, of course, that's the way I have it set up. The top one is where my expanded joint is and I want to cut the top off it. So I put the tape on the bottom of it, and that just reminds me that that's the bottom bit, because I'm only going to put one trench in this. Now, what we're going to do as well is we're going to put feet in. If you have a look at this, you can see the feet I have here. They're only small, they're not very big, but we need to, when we cut the trench, allow for the fact that we're going to cut some material away from the bottom edge of the box. We also need to make sure that we have adequate support for the base in the bottom of the box. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set that. Now I have a set measurement for most of mine, and that's 10 millimeters to the top of the tooth. Okay, so if I drop that down to 10 millimeters, what I have is I have a 4 millimeter trench and I have 6 millimeters below it. That 6 millimeters is plenty of material for support and to cut away a shadow line. So now all I'm going to do is rotate around the box. Now you've seen me do this before. Just remember the router bit spins in this direction, so we want to go around this way. So we go around this way when we cut our minor trench, and then when we go back the other way we're going to do it the correct way, which is this way. You get the picture. So, ears on everybody. Now if you look very carefully you can see that I have a really nice, that wet bit, Gary, is the oil from the trench, from the bearing. I put a little bit too much on. Should be very careful about that. You can see I've got a really nice clean trench in there. All right. So now leave your settings as they are. I'm going to remove that bearing. And replace it with the original one that comes with the cutter. So because our settings are exactly the same, we don't need to do anything. So what I'm going to do now is cut the correct method, which is against the rotation of the router bit. Okay? Ears on everybody. Okay, so now I have, blow that stuff off. Normally I've got the dust extractor on there, but it gets in the way when we're trying to do little tasks like this. Now you can see I have this lovely trench 5mm deep all the way around the box. Okay, you can see it there and all the way up here. So around the bottom of the box I have this really nice clean cut trench. The corners are rounded because we have a round router bit. I'll show you how to fix that in a second for those of you who haven't seen it before. So what I'm going to do here is just take this router bit out. We don't need it anymore. Drop that back down. Okay, now before I take the tape off, there are two things that we do. The first thing is we mark 2 of our corners. Now I mark 2 of the corners because they're the 2 I want to go back together. You've got dovetails, so the box will go back in its original place when you've, from the time you cut your trench. So I've marked 2 of the corners. The second thing I'm going to do is measure the size of the base. So when you measure the base, I'll have a pencil here. When you measure the base, you've got a 5mm trench there, and you can actually see that when I put the ruler in. You can see it's gone exactly to 5mm. Right? So that 5mm, and we measure across to the inside edge of the box, and in this case it's 181. And then instead of adding the 5mm that we have in the trench, I'm only going to add 4mm. Now that will give me a gap around the base so that we can expand, so that the material will expand and contract when humidity changes and so forth. So measure from the bottom of the trench, just go over this again, measure from the bottom of the trench to the inside edge and then add 4mm instead of 5. Okay, so I have 185, so I'm going to write that on the side, 185 wide, and then my length is 283 to the inside. Now this measurement can change. This measurement will change if you've got a higher overlap. Okay, so if you've got more of an overlap, your measurements will change. So every box, measure every box. I don't usually cut my bases until such time as I've done this work, because the timber tends to change a bit, and every time I cut one it might be a little bigger or a little bit smaller, so it's always a good idea to do it as you go. Okay, so what did I say that was? 183 and 5 is 188, 288 I should say. So I need a piece of material that's 288mm long by 185mm wide. Now, good idea to take the tape off at this stage. If you leave it on and start fiddling around with the box, you'll end up with the whole thing stuck together, and you can see on the tape, I'll just show you on the camera here, you can see on the tape, you can see there's a little bit of dust and stuff like that. We don't want a tear out, and that's exactly what it's happened there. I can fix that, see that little bit there? Well, I'll just show you that. See where the tape has actually caught it? It's yeah, not a happy little piece. It's because I stuck it down too hard, and this particular tape is notorious for that sort of stuff. Some tapes work, some don't. I like this one because it doesn't stretch, and I don't want the box to stretch or move while I'm cutting my trench. Okay, bin that. So there's my box with my trench in it. Okay, next step, make a base. So what I've done here, I'm going to make a cedar base. So I have a piece of cedar and I've sanded both sides. We've sanded it down to 600. You can go further if you like. I find 600 is adequate with the Merca. And so I've just sanded it flat and I've cut it to almost the right size. Okay, so it's not exactly the right size, so I'm going to trim it up and I'll show you how to go about that. So just put the box aside for a sec. So the first thing I do, and I've already cut it square on one end. You can actually see this has got a really nice little bit of grain in it too. So it's going to add another feature. If somebody turns the box over, it'll add another feature to the box. So 188. You can see I didn't, oh, it's nearly the right size. 188 is there. Okay, so now I'll just dock that off and I'll just go and dock it off. So there I have that docked off, and the width was 185. Same thing, just measure your measurement, get it right, just check to make sure you got it right, and then we cut it off. But I'll show you this before I go. If you look at the grain on this box, you can see that it's very straight sort of grain there, and you've got this lovely shaping of the grain here. This is more prone to warping than this, but in a thin piece of timber that's only 4mm thick, it's not going to worry it too much because it's relatively flexible and it will stay pretty much steady or stable when it's in situ. So all I'm going to do is trim off the edge there. Let's go back to here. Okay, so there's my piece of timber for the base. As you can see, the corners need to be rounded over. Now, I showed you this before. I have one of these little pocket squares that we make, and the easiest way to do it, if you don't have the equipment that I have, or actually I saw Derek Lark had a lovely one, a little piece of equipment. I'll show you basically what he has. So you can round that over, and then you can go to your sander and then sand it off, or you can do it by hand. There's lots of different ways of doing it. But when you make a lot of boxes, you need other equipment to actually sort of lessen the amount of time that you spend fiddling around with small little things like this, because that takes a little bit of time. So let's go over here. I'll bring ET. Okay, so you can see that we have our sander set up over here, and I have my lovely little sander system. So all I need to do now is just sand off the corners. I've made this little jig that moves back and forth. It's just a piece of aluminium on a platform with a couple of stops, and I can clamp it. As you can see, I've got it clamped onto my bench, and it's just a matter of turn the sander on, flip it over, okay, let's go back to our stand. Derek Lark sent me a photo, I think it was Derek, sent me a photo of one that he made on his 3D printer, which was quite a nice little one. In a couple of weeks' time, when I've got all things sorted, I might be able to bring you up the photo, if that's okay, Derek. If it's not, well then, well, let me know and I won't show it. So, a little piece of sandpaper. Take around the edges. And so there's my base. Fairly simple, fairly easy. It doesn't take a lot to get it together. So now,
Big camera.
what I'm going to do now here is pull it apart. And when you pull it apart, when you pull your box apart, do it at this end here, support the joints. Particularly when you've got a big box like this, you've got quite a number of joints in there. So the idea is to make sure that you're supporting the timber. You don't want to just reef it apart. If you reef it apart, what happens is your outside edge will fold away and then you end up damaging the joint. You might not break the joint, but you more than likely damage it. And so, let's go here. Just see if this fits. Sometimes it's a bit of guesswork. So I'm playing the game.
A little bit tight, isn't it?
It's a little bit tight. Okay, so what I need to do with that is to run that through my drum sander to get it to fit. It's not going to fit. So I'm not going to try. I'll just run that through the drum sander at some stage and then I'll fit it and I'll show you next week exactly how it goes, which is really strange. The temperature here at the moment is quite warm. I think it's 21, 22 degrees. The humidity is really high and it's extremely wet. So what's happened with that piece of timber since I cut it is it has expanded in its thickness. I had it at 4 millimeters. It's obviously gone a little bit more and now it won't fit into the trench. So what I need to do is give it another sand so that I can fit it into the trench. And I'll do that down the track. But before we go to that point, what I'm going to do is cut some feet in here. So bear with me with the base, you'll see that later. Right now, let's pull this apart. There's all my 4 bits. I can take this off here now. Don't need that one. Now what I'm going to do is cut some feet. So here's my 4 pieces. And my feet are going to be in the bottom of each of these pieces here. So with my piece of chalk, and I do this even though I don't have to, I do this anyway as a matter of habit, because when I'm making boxes where I've got a trench at the top and a trench at the bottom, you've got to make sure that you're working at the bottom. So as a matter of habit, I just put a chalk mark on there just to tell me that's where I'm going to be working. Okay, now measuring. Important you get this one right. I've lost my ruler. There, it's in front of me. Hi, vey. Okay, it's important that you think about how you go about the feet. If you look at the feet on here, you'll see that they look pretty much the same. But in actual fact, this one here is longer. That foot is longer than this one here. Reason being is that a long side should always have a longer foot on it, and a short foot should always be on the short side. And that's generally for a visual effect. If you had a square box, of course, you'd have them all exactly the same size. but not when you have a long and a short or a rectangular box. So what I'm going to do here, and this is something you can experiment with. Guess some measurements, have a cut. If you don't like it, recut it. Okay, so, and then your next box, make it a different size. So over a period of time, you'll get to work out a set of measurements that suits what you're talking about or what you think the box should look like. Okay, so I've set that at 40 mil. Okay, so my foot's going to be 40 millimetres there. I'm going to have a 40 millimetre foot on the other end. And then I'll take my short one. I'm going to have a 10 millimetre variation. You can do whatever you like. You can have a 10 mil, you can have a 15 mil. You can change depending on what suits you. Now, what I've done here, I've only put one mark on my piece of timber. I find that the more I use this thing, the more mistakes I get. All right? Now, it's just because I hurry and my mind's thinking about lots of different things at once, where my next step's going and all that sort of stuff. So I try to minimise the use of that thing. I don't have one of those stretchy ones at the moment. So how I've gone about this is I sit my piece of timber up in front of me like that with the trench on the outside, drop it over on its back, and I put a mark on the left-hand side of the piece of timber. You'll notice it's there. It's the left-hand side. I've done the same on this one. Stood it up like so, laid over on its back, and put my mark on the left-hand end. There's a reason for that, and I'll show it to you right now. So, get all this stuff out of the way. Fence.
That, Col, that variation in the width of the foot front to back is all about proportion and how pleasing it is to the eye, isn't it? It's all about balance.
That's correct. And that's a very good word, Pam. That was balance. We all have particular likes and dislikes. People who are really fussy about measurements, you'll find that they've got it. It's got to be exactly right, and you've got to have 1/3, 2/3, or so forth. But to most people, when you pick something up, you go, "Oh, that doesn't look right." So what we do is, in our mind's eye, we go, "Oh, maybe that could have been, and it could have been this, it could have been that." So all you need to do is, just think about a few things. Remember, when we're talking about what's pleasing to the eye, we're also talking about when we cut things in half. It's either cut in half or you've got 1/3, 2/3. And that seems to be more pleasing than a 1/4 to 3/4, or if you know what I'm saying. It sounded like gibberish too, but it does work. Okay, so what I have here is a TSRW 12 router bit. It's a Carby tool router bit. It's a 10 millimetre router bit. If you don't have a TSRW 12, you can always use the straight bit. Can't see that. You can always use the straight bit out of the dovetail, your A10 dovetail cutter. Okay, so that's just the straight bit out of that. You can use that. I find that tends to tear a little bit with cedar, so therefore a spiral bit is much better to use.
Could you use the
there.
Could you use the B10 straight cutter, or
you could, but
is that a little bit too heavy-handed?
No, it's too big a diameter.
Right.
Okay, if you use the B10 cutter, this one here, you've got too much of a diameter there.
Right.
And that gives you a very slow curve on here. You could use it, I suppose, but you get a really slow curve here, whereas this gives you a little bit more of a tighter curve.
Right,
in your
because you don't have much space, much depth to work with.
No, you don't have a lot. Okay. So, setting up, just show you what I did there. All I did there was put a piece of timber there. If you're using two different thickness materials, of course, get the thickest one, and it just has to be above the piece of material. Doesn't have to be any specific measurement above it, just above it. And I have a fence here. going to go on there, and I'm going to shift the camera for you in a sec, as soon as I get this all locked in. Doesn't time fly?
Yeah.
That's already 30 minutes. Okay, let's get ET around here where you can see what's going on. How good is that camera system we have now? If you can get it focused. Come on. There we go.
That's it.
Okay. Now, the diameter of that router bit is 10 millimetres. If I bring my fence to the middle, so I'll put my fingernail right in the middle of the router bit and bring the fence over till it touches it. What I have protruding is, and I don't think you can, I hope you can see that. What I have protruding is 5 millimetres of router bit on the fence. What I'm cutting, I've got 6 millimetres to play with. If I cut it with the 5 millimetres, I would only have 1 millimetre of material for support for the base. And 9 times out of 10, that's not enough. So what I do is I just tweak it a tiny little bit. Now, it's guesswork. This is something you can play with as you go through your box making work, and have a little play with some of these things and experiment. What I'm doing is not hard and fast rules. It's something that you can manipulate yourself and have a little play with. Okay. Now, set up, I have a stop. And all I'm going to do with that stop is I'm going to set it so that my pencil mark is on the left hand side of the router bit, because the router bit spins in this direction. And what happens is it spins onto the piece of timber here, off the piece of timber on that side, so the leading edge will always have a little bit of tear out, particularly with cedar. So it will always have that tiny little bit of tear out, and I don't want that to occur down here where we're going to stop, because then you have tear out on the leading edge of the foot. It looks pretty ordinary. So just going to test that to just make sure I've got enough material there. That's it. It goes to there, bring up my foot. Now I need a couple of clamps. Okay, so the first one, clamp the fence down. And the second one, clamp the stop in place. Now you need that stop there. Number one, it's a location point for that measurement. Okay, so you've got something to stop against. If you tried to push that along there, what would happen is that because the router bit's spinning pretty hard, it would try and tear it out of your hands, and it would rip it. Okay, and you end up with tear out across the thing here, across the front there. So the idea is to hold it up against the stop, push it into the fence, and then just move it along. Okay, so ears on everybody, and we'll go through this process. There's my tear out. Okay, so I don't want that to happen up here. So we started against the fence, we pushed it there, and we moved it along. Now we've gone 3/4 of the way. If we flip the piece of timber over and start again, see this router bit's done a fair bit of work. It's got a little burn mark there on the end grain. So we need to deal with that. I'll need to fix the router bit. But you can see that I've got lots of material along the base there for the base to sit on. And I've got an exact the same measurement here and here. And the shoulder on both of those is perfectly clean. So it's quite a nice finish as well, because I have a spiral bit. Now, I marked one piece of timber. My second one, I didn't bother marking it because I have all of my tooling set up so that it's in the right place. So it's just a matter of cutting the second one. And when you look at the feet, you can see this lovely foot on the bottom, and there's a shadow line there. And that shadow line is what we're trying to achieve. The depth of the cut is really irrelevant, so long as you've got a nice step there. So now to do the other one, it's just a matter of slide your stop along, set that up exactly the same, and then we'll do the same with that one. Ears on. So now we have these lovely trenches that are lovely feet, and nice relatively smooth surface that's easy to fix if we have to do any sanding to. So now we just put the box together. Now it's at this point that I glue the box together. Now I can't glue the box together for you because I've got to put the base through. Let's get these here up where we can see what's going on. Take off my clamps. I can't put the base together. I was going to glue it together, but it's the way things go. Doesn't always work. So we'll just go on with the next bit. What I'd like to do is I'd like to cut the top off the box, show you how that's done. So what we would do here is find our marks that have our cross and that cross. That one goes in there. This one goes in here. So basically the frame is pretty much set, ready for gluing. And of course I would have the base in that pretty much straight away. So there's your frame. Now, while you were sleeping, I built another one. This one, the base fitted nicely. Now, it may have expanded overnight. There's not much rattle in there. I've got a little bit of glue here and a little bit of glue here. I didn't fill the whole trench up with glue or any other sort of bits and pieces. All I did was put a little bit of glue here and a little bit of glue there, just to stop this from moving around and to stop it from rattling. Because once we start putting things in the box, you're not going to get a rattle. So we'll drop that down. Now, when you get it to this stage, the idea is to flat surface, flat surface. Now, if you have a sander big enough, of course, use a sander. But if you don't, you get your lovely big sanding board. Now, Jim Carroll now sells, this is from
Carol's Woodcraft Supplies.
Carol's Woodcraft Supplies, now have these 300mm sandpaper. Now, this grit is a 180 grit. I've got 4 or 5 of these, and they've all got different size grits on them, and it depends on what I'm doing as to which one I'm using. Okay, so the first thing I do with my glued box is I'll sand the feet very carefully, just a light sand, turn it around a couple of times, and keep working and keep sanding, keep turning it around. The next thing I do is the top of the box, and I will do exactly the same thing. After a while you get to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, turn around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, turn around, and you end up with something that's nice and flat. And then you take the corners off. Now, I've already done 3 sides. I'm just going to show you how I do the other side. You can see here with this box, I've got the end of it still needs a bit of work to do. All right. So what we'll do is we'll go over to the sander, and I'll show you how we get that sorted. So I'll just change ET around. Okay, now all I'm going to do here is sand, not by hand. You'll notice I keep changing that around all the time, shifting it around, moving it so that I don't actually sand too much off one edge and not enough off the other, and not have a lot of pressure. Okay, I have 10 minutes left, which means I can get the top cut off this one, and you'll see now it's nice and smooth all the way around. Okay, so I've done all the way around the box. I did the other 3 earlier. Watching me sand things is like watching paint dry, and that can be fairly tedious. So we get rid of some of these clamps out of the way.
Col,
Yes.
I know we've mentioned this before, but what's on the belt?
The belt's 80 grit,
80 grit.
but it's an old piece of 80 grit. It's fairly worn. It's due for replacement very soon. You can get lots of other stuff. That's the Merca belt, that one.
Is it Abranet?
Abranet, yes. So it's quite good for lots of different things. And because it's perforated, it gets rid of the dust really quickly. So now it doesn't have a build-up of dust. Okay. So now,
So,
what we're going to do is we're going to cut the top off. Okay. So my first task, and I generally do this by eye, I don't try and sort of fiddle around sort of making measurements or anything like that, is I'm just going to mark the centre of the route of the centre of the wider joint. So all I'm going to do is pass that over my router bit, and the router bit I'm using as you can see, very small. Okay, so it's just a little 4mm router bit. And when I do this task, I do it in 2 passes. Now, for those of you who watched Dave Stanton last week, you'll see that he cut the top off his box using the table saw, but with the same technique as this. He cut around the box, only I'm going to use a router. So now we set this at half the height of the router bit, of the timber. Can be a little bit more. Again, a bit of guesswork. This is something that you'll work out after a while. And then we grab a fence. Okay, this one will do the job. And again, I have to change and show you with E.T. Get him over here. I'm not quite sure if that's going to give you the best view. We'll see. Okay, there it is. Any fence will do for this. I have got tall ones, but this one will do the job. As you can see, here we are. And when we set the fence, we set it on our mark. So the centre of the router bit, like so. Clamp that down. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pass over the top of the router bit, keeping the timber hard up against my fence. Okay, so ears on. And so that's giving me a nice clean cut all the way down there. All I'm going to do now, and I find the best way to do it is to push it forward like so and then rotate it back towards yourself and restart the cut in the trench that you've already cut. So ears on. And so what I have there now, sorry, do you want to change?
I just wanted to move it back a little bit.
Yeah, do that. You can see all the way around the box, nice clean trench, all the way around. So what I'm going to do now is cut the rest of the top off. So before you start cutting the top off, build yourself something like this. Now, this is what I call a splitting board. Right? I have it set aside. It's exactly the same size as my trench. Okay. Even if it's a tiny bit thicker than the trench itself, when you push it into the trench and tape it together, when you do your final cut, it'll pop the whole lot apart, which is quite a good idea, considering that you don't want everything collapsing on here. Okay, so now all I have to do is raise my route a bit. So it comes through a piece of timber. Lock it in place. A little bit of fur on there. So I'm going to do 3 cuts to begin with. Now that you've got that done, what I have here is I've got no support whatsoever. So if I slide my piece of material in here, and I usually make the material big enough to fit in the box. I don't make 2 pieces or 3 pieces and try and fit them around the outside. I find it a whole lot easier just to fit that in there, like so. So it's fitting in there. What it's doing is just giving the top support. Get my trusty tape. Just take that on there like that. And my final cut will be straight through there. Okay, and there is my top. Now, cedar is notoriously bad for the furry bits. You can see it's got a little bit furry here. That's just a little bit of tidy up. It's not that hard, but you can see now that the top is off there, and when you look at my joints, you can see they're all the same size. Okay, so they've come up quite nice. So next week we're going to start rebuilding the inside. We're going to start doing all of the bits and pieces that are necessary to get your box into a position where you can put hinges onto it. So we're going to do a whole lot of that next week. So we'll stop there. At least we got the top off it, and I'll have to make up another base for the other box. So thanks for watching, folks. Flick over to Dave's. He's making a couple of light fittings today, and he'll be using the drill press, and a jigsaw, a bandsaw, Capex, and also there'll be some progress on his cedar box that he made. So flick across to there when you're finished here, and yeah, you get some more information. So have a nice afternoon, everybody, and stay safe. And if you like what you saw, please give us the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and we'll keep you relatively entertained. So thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you all later.